The cold and fog corrupt the streets of Brussels. Nothing suspicious about the weather conditions on this early morning of 9 December 2022. As the clock strikes 10, a unit of Belgian federal investigators move into position at several addresses across the city, including an apartment on Avenue Plasky, and are given the green light to initiate one of the most serious white-collar crime raids in the history of the European Union. The investigators knock on the door of the first major suspect involved in this corruption scandal, Antonio Panzeri. The Italian politician opens the door and quickly finds himself arrested and his apartment subject to a thorough investigation. There's money lying everywhere, and not just a small amount. Over 600,000 euros in banknotes are seized. The police are almost doubting whether this was a bank heist. Meanwhile, another unit operating in the European quarter arrests Francesco Giorgi, the right-hand man of Antonio Panzeri, and perhaps more crucially, the partner of Eva Kaili, Vice President of the European Parliament. Also suspected of involvement in the corruption scandal, Giorgi is taken into custody as police maintain surveillance outside Kaili's apartment, unable to act immediately due to her parliamentary immunity. Suddenly, at 12:46, officers observe Alexandros Kaili, the Vice President's father, leaving his daughter's apartment carrying an overloaded suitcase. Suspecting it may contain evidence, the police follow him to his room at the Sofitel Hotel. With the assistance of a hotel staff member, they enter the room and seize the suitcase. Inside, more than 720,000 euros in banknotes. The discovery proves decisive, changing the legal situation surrounding Eva Kaili's parliamentary immunity. Investigators argue that the vice president is linked to an ongoing money transfer after being caught red-handed in moving large quantities of cash, with the father as an accomplice. Later that evening, the Belgian Federal Police arrest Eva Kaili and search her apartment. Large sums of cash are recovered in the building, and the sheer volume reportedly even overwhelms the detector dog used during the search. During questioning of the arrested suspects, authorities begin tracing the origin of the money, and one name quickly emerges at the center of the investigation: Antonio Panzeri. Now you may be wondering, why is this piece of information important? Antonio Panzeri is the key to understanding the crimes committed in what is known as QatarGate. Let's make a deeper dive into the background of the man that was pulling the strings for this corruption scandal. Antonio Panzeri, known as the Bear from Milan, is an Italian politician and former member of the European Parliament. During his time as MEP, he chairs the delegation for relations with Maghreb countries and serves on the subcommittee on human rights. After leaving the European Parliament in 2019, Panzeri founds an NGO in Brussels called Fight Impunity, which states its mission as promoting accountability for human rights violations. Panzeri's previous positions are considered relevant by investigators in understanding the alleged scheme. Belgian judicial authorities suspect him of money laundering, corruption, and participation in a criminal organization. The first charge is money laundering. For those unfamiliar, money laundering is the concealment of the origin of illegally obtained funds. Investigators consider the 600,000 euros found in Panzeri's apartment as potential evidence of such a scheme. They argue that the former MEP handled large quantities of undeclared cash, keeping it in his private residence rather than through the formal banking system, This allegation leads directly to the second charge. Corruption. Prosecutors allege that the cash found in Panzeri's possession came from foreign officials, which he acquired during his tenure as chair of the delegation for relations with the Maghreb countries. In 2014, he is suspected of receiving €50,000 from Abderrahim Atmoun, a Moroccan politician with whom he co-chaired the EU-Morocco Joint Parliamentary Committee, a formal framework for dialogue between the European and Moroccan parliaments. Investigators claim the funds were used to support Panzeri's re-election campaign, while he allegedly used his institutional position to influence political opinions on Morocco within his parliamentary network. A more recent example of this type of deal involves Qatar. On the 10th of October 2022, Antonio Panzeri and Francesco Giorgi held a confidential meeting in Brussels with Ali bin Samek Al Mari, the Qatari Minister of Labour, and his right-hand man, Boujalal Betahar. Surveillance cameras captured Panzeri leaving the hotel carrying a large suitcase. Judicial authorities allege that following this meeting, Panzeri used his extensive network to encourage politicians to present a positive image of Qatar at several European Parliament conferences ahead of the FIFA World Cup. The third charge concerns participation in a criminal organization linked to the NGO Fight Impunity. Officially, Fight Impunity presented itself as an organization promoting human rights, accountability, and justice. Based in Brussels, it hosted conferences, meetings, and events within European institutions to discuss topics aligned with this mission. However, investigators deduce that Panzeri used the NGO as a covert network to channel money and gifts from foreign governments, and in exchange, influence decisions and opinions within the European Parliament. Now at this point, you may have noticed that Antonio Panzeri was no longer a member of the European Parliament when the NGO was founded. So how could his voice be so influential in an institution he no longer worked for? Antonio Panzeri needed an insider within the European Parliament who was low profile but could act as an intermediary between himself and members of the European Parliament. And he found the perfect profile: Francesco Giorgi. Francesco Giorgi was a parliamentary assistant for multiple members of the European Parliament. He helped prepare briefings and speeches, helped coordinate political positions, and had access to internal schedules, drafts, and parliamentary strategy. In other words, Giorgi was the ideal candidate for acting as a key operational link between Panzeri and the MEPs. Whilst Giorgi was close enough to power to shape outcomes, he was too far from the spotlight to have them executed. This is where the final pieces of the puzzle come in. The MEPs. Who were the so-called executors of this scheme? Investigators point to several MEPs, including Mark Tarabella, Alessandra Moretti, Mary Arena, and most notably, Eva Kaili. The individuals just mentioned are all currently accused of having received money from Qatari officials via the Panzeri and Giorgi pipeline in exchange for promoting the nation's interests. Let's have a look at some cases which reflect this entire scheme in action. It is the 14th of November, 2022. The European Parliament's Subcommittee on Human Rights, led by Mary Arena, holds a public hearing in Brussels to discuss human rights issues and the upcoming FIFA World Cup in Qatar. The session includes Ali bin Samek Al Mari, Qatar's Minister of Labour, who has reported ties to Antonio Panzeri and Francesco Giorgi. Investigators claim that Panzeri and Giorgi met with Al Mari in a hotel before the hearing, allegedly helping to prepare the minister and assist with speech drafts to promote Qatari interests. Giorgi reportedly translated and edited parts of the speeches. Here is a clip of Al-Mari speaking during the session.
There should not be any politicizing, using some misinformation, specifically of figures of the victims of the deaths. So we've spoken about 15,000, 10,000. So these are inaccurate figures. There are some media, unfortunately, who said that the Qataris are a bunch of, the Qatari nationals are a bunch of criminals, of terrorists.
Meanwhile, at 16:55, during the middle of the public hearing, as Alessandra Moretti and Mark Tarabella are set to voice their opinions on the topics related to Qatar, a secretive conversation is held in which Panzeri orders Giorgi, who is present at the conference, to instruct the two MEPs to defend Qatar against criticism. It goes as follows.
Sì, adesso è lì, sta arrivando. Lei, Moretti. Ascolta, deve intervenire dicendo, però non ho visto tutta questa attenzione 4 anni fa, quando era in Russia. Sì. E poi, aspetta, devi dire a Mark di dire 2 cose. La prima, di fare questo intervento e dire spero che ci sarà lo stesso livello di attenzione anche per il prossimo, in America e in Messico. E poi anche che se la FIFA doveva essere interrogata, doveva esserlo da un'altra parte, non qui. Sì. Prova a scrivergli. Ma digli di farlo con calma, senza agitarsi.
At 5 p.m., Alessandra Moretti and Mark Tarabella are given the floor.
الرياضة ينبغي أن تكون مكبر صوت عظيم، وهي فرصة كبرى من أجل أن نؤكد عن حقوق الإنسان وعن دفاع عن الحريات والتقدم الذي نحصل عليه. أنا أطلب من الزملاء من البرلمان أن لا يستخدموا دائما نفس الطريقة، لأن هذا ما قمنا به مع روسيا عندما نظمت الفعاليات السابقة للعاصمة الشتوية.
2014, 2018, we didn't have all of this when we were talking about Sochi or Beijing or when the World Cup went there.
As the public hearing comes to an end, Mary Arena addresses the committee. Let's hear her remarks.
Thank you all for participating in this debate. And let me say I'm very happy Mr. Fulter is here because he's in charge of the due diligence file, which is up to companies. The state companies need to respect human rights here, and it's absolutely essential that there be such laws, and hopefully Qatar will continue to improve.
At the end of the session, Mary Arena and Antonio Panzeri have a telephone conversation which goes as follows.
Hello, Maria.
So, did you watch?
Yes, I watched. You were excellent.
Yes, the minister happy?
But yes.
He told me at some point, that's enough now. I told him no. I need to take everyone for a minute.
He is not very used to it, but in the end, he was happy. Come on.
Yes? Okay, good. He told me, that's enough now. You can't. That's enough. I said, no, I can't. They're all listed, so I need to give them all the floor.
No, I think it was well balanced, so it's good.
Yes, you heard that right. In the space of a couple of minutes, Antonio Panzeri, Francesco Giorgi, and 3 members of the European Parliament all colluded with each other to portray a positive image of Qatar during the public hearing. But the story doesn't end there. At 1919, Mary Arena and Antonio Panzeri discuss the upcoming EU Parliament plenary session, where MEPs will vote on whether they support a resolution to condemn the human rights issues in Qatar, including migrant worker conditions, labour rights, and unsafe working standards. Listen closely.
It would be better to not have a debate.
Yes, the debate in plenary session is completely illogical, but oh well.
Yes, that's it, because the problem with the plenary debate is that only those who say things aren't going well get a chance to speak. Because those who say things are going well don't get a chance to speak. And so it doesn't seem justified to me.
Meanwhile, tomorrow, we need to break the emergency order requested by your Gluckman.
Ah, Glucksmann? Oh no! Raphael Glucksmann requested an emergency, my God!
Yes, he asked with an emergency on Qatar. And so, tomorrow, we need to get access the point of view you gave to Mark.
Exactly 1 week later, on 21 November 2022, the plenary session is held as expected. There's an atmosphere of unease from the outset due to the sensitivity of the topics discussed. Some left-wing MEPs decide to wear LGBTQ+ armbands in recognition of Qatar's notorious human rights record. But this doesn't deter Mark Tarabella from reiterating his praise for Qatar's progression on economic and social issues.
The country has taken steps to introduce reform, and the World Cup has been that trigger for reform to be undertaken, and we should recognise that. The kafala system has been abolished. It's the only country in the Arabian Peninsula to do so. There's a minimum wage, payment of salary into a bank account, a compensation fund.
Perhaps the most passionate speech in defense of Qatar comes from Eva Kaili.
Today, the World Cup in Qatar is a proof, actually, of how sports diplomacy can achieve a historical transformation of the country, with reforms that inspired the Arab world. ILO said that Qatar is a front-runner in labor rights, abolishing kafala, introducing minimum wage, despite the challenges that even European companies are denying to enforce these laws.
At the end of the session, the European Parliament agrees on a draft resolution, which is set to be formally voted on later that same plenary week in Strasbourg. Supporting the resolution means that Parliament acknowledges ongoing human rights concerns in Qatar, calls on Qatari authorities to implement and enforce labour reforms, and urges FIFA to ensure that host nations uphold human rights standards when organising global events such as the World Cup. The resolution is adopted on 24 November 2022 after a majority of MEPs present vote in favour. However, the voting breakdown raises some questions. According to the records, around 86% of members from the Socialists and Democrats group, including Eva Kaili, Mark Tarabella, Mary Arena, and Alessandro Moretti, vote against the resolution. The outcome sparks immediate concern. In the aftermath of the vote, Manon Aubry, an MEP and prominent figure in French politics, publicly voices her suspicions about possible corruption within the European Parliament.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous, je vous fais cette vidéo un peu à chaud, juste en sortant des négociations sur un texte d'une résolution du Parlement européen visant à dénoncer les violations des droits de l'homme liées à l'organisation de la Coupe du Monde au Qatar. Vous savez, on vous en a beaucoup parlé, ça fait plus d'1 an qu'on se bat ici au Parlement européen pour qu'on ait une résolution, pour qu'on prenne une position claire qui dénonce les violations des droits humains au Qatar. Et on le savait que le combat et la bataille seraient difficiles. On arrive réussi en début de semaine à enfin faire voter le Parlement et acter le fait qu'on fasse cette résolution cette semaine. Manifestement, il y a des groupes qui n'en voulaient pas, qui ont voté contre et qui sont venus pourrir les négociations. Et à un point où je me demande en fait si autour de la table des négociations, est-ce qu'on avait des représentants des groupes politiques ou est-ce qu'on n'avait pas tout simplement l'ambassade du Qatar.
At this point, you may be wondering how a non-binding resolution adopted by a European institution could matter so much to a foreign state like Qatar. After all, the resolution is merely a political instrument used by the European Union to express its position on human rights. On the surface, such a vote appears to carry little immediate economic, legal, or geopolitical weight. So why would a foreign government allegedly spend vast sums of money to influence how MEPs speak about its record? The simple reason is that Qatar is determined to build back a positive image after years of reputational damage in international relations. Indeed, Qatar has faced scrutiny in the Western world for many years due to its human rights record and its alleged links with extremist groups such as the Taliban and Hamas. This had long-term consequences for its economic influence, diplomatic leverage, and cultural exchange. The nation is clearly willing to pay any price to seek reputational relief, and it saw an opportunity to do this with the recent resolution vote at the European Parliament. However, investigators also point to cases where Qatar allegedly seeks to influence EU decisions with direct political and practical implications. One such example emerges on 1 December 2022 during a European Parliament session addressing visa requirements for Qatari nationals. At the time, the European Commission proposes an amendment to EU visa policy that would exempt Qatari citizens from short-term stay Schengen visa requirements. As part of the legislative process, the proposal requires approval from both the European Parliament and the Council of the European Union. The draft measure is examined by the Parliament's Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, which approves it by a strong majority. According to the records, several MEPs later implicated in the QatarGate investigation, including Mark Tarabella, Alessandro Moretti, and Eva Kaili, are present during this key stage of the process. So where do the judicial proceedings currently stand? At this stage, only one individual has received a criminal conviction in the QatarGate investigation, Antonio Panzeri. In January 2023, the Italian former MEP signed a cooperation agreement with Belgian prosecutors. As part of the deal, he received a reduced one-year sentence, an €80,000 fine, and forfeited assets worth approximately €1 million. In exchange, Panzeri admitted his involvement and agreed to provide detailed testimony on how the alleged corruption network operated, including its financial arrangements, methods, and the individuals involved. Panzeri's testimony proved central to the investigation, helping authorities advance cases involving several other key figures, including Eva Kaili, Francesco Giorgi, Mark Tarabella, Mary Arena, and Alessandro Moretti, who are all still currently under investigation for their potential involvement in money laundering, corruption, and the suspected criminal organization uncovered by Belgian prosecutors. And yet, the current list of suspects may only represent the tip of the iceberg. Other figures reportedly connected to the investigation include Andrea Cozzolino, Italian MEP, Niccolò Figa Talamanca, president of the NGO No Peace Without Justice, and Luca Vicentini, Secretary General of the European Confederation of Trade Unions. Investigators believe the network of individuals, organizations, and possibly multiple countries involved in the scandal may extend beyond those already identified. This is one of the reasons why the investigations continue more than 3 years after the initial arrests. The Belgian authorities have gone down a dangerous rabbit hole, uncovering a web of alleged corruption that could have significant implications for the credibility of European institutions. The case has proven both sensitive and unprecedented, and its full impact is still unfolding. At a time when many European countries face political unrest, QatarGate is a curse which simply adds fuel to the fire. Can the EU survive this storm and maintain its legitimacy? Can it still aspire to the vision its founding fathers had in mind? A transparent and ethical democratic union? Only time will tell. The investigation is still far from over. Secrets are still to be revealed. Crimes are still to be exposed. Pandora's box has only just been opened.